Eleanor Whitman here. You might have heard parts of my story already. The newspapers certainly had their fun with it. But let me tell you what really happened in that house, in my own words. If you want to hear how a woman disappears in plain sight while wearing her husband's lies like a second skin, pull up a chair. And don't forget to subscribe. I've got more truths to tell than those headlines ever caught. The basement smelled of damp concrete and mildew, a scent so thick I could taste it. David had called it my private suite when he moved me down there, his voice slick as motor oil. Just until we get the upstairs rewired, he'd said, though the wiring had been fine since 1998. I counted the days by the thin line of light under the door, not sunlight, just the hall bulb left burning through the night. Breakfast came at 7:15 every morning. Always cold toast and weak tea in a plastic cup. David would set it on the top step like I was some stray dog he couldn't bear to look at. By the time I heard his truck pull out of the driveway, the tea would be lukewarm. I'd hidden a pen in the seam of my mattress. Found it 6 months in when David forgot to check my pockets before throwing my winter coat downstairs. The first page of my journal was just grocery lists, mundanities, tuna cans, dental floss, things I knew he'd never buy. But by page 37, I was drawing property line maps from memory, tracing every inch of land the house sat on, land my father had given us as a wedding gift back when David still pretended to love me. "Your memory's going, Ellie," he'd say when I asked why my signature looked wrong on the refinance papers. "Doctor said it's early onset. Better let me handle things." I let him. For a while. The basement had one gift, silence. No phones buzzing, no televisions spewing the morning news, just the hum of the water heater and the creak of floorboards overhead. In that silence, I counted. Not days. Power. David's company always underbid contracts. I knew because I'd done his books before he suggested I quit accounting. $4,000 missing here. $8,000 there. Small enough that clients wouldn't sue, just grumble. He kept 2 checkbooks, one for the tax man, one for the lake house he thought I didn't know about. I wrote down every secret in curling script, the letters cramped like prisoners. Charged his golf clubs to the business account. Stole old Mrs. Callahan's copper gutters for scrap. Lost $300,000 in Vegas last spring. The journal swelled with proof, but I waited. A woman who plans needs 2 things, patience and the right moment. The moment came on a Tuesday. I heard the thud from upstairs, the way a body sounds when it hits hardwood, not like in movies, all dramatic crashes, just meat meeting floor. The silence afterward was louder. By the time I reached the kitchen, David was already turning gray. His phone lit up with a call from someone named Tammy. I let it ring. It took 7 minutes for his breathing to stop. I know because I timed it. The police asked polite questions. The paramedic kept touching my shoulder like I might shatter. All I said was, "He always told me I was dizzy. Guess today it was his turn." When they found the journals, the detective's fingers shook turning the pages. At the trial, my daughter Jenny wore black. She hadn't visited in 4 years. David said she was busy, said I embarrassed her. But when the prosecutor asked why I never called for help, I looked straight at her. Who would have believed me? The gavel came down. The reporters scrambled. And as I walked out of that courtroom, the first thing I did was breathe air that didn't smell like basement. Funny thing about silence, it's not empty. It's full of everything you've been waiting to say. The reporters swarmed like hungry crows when I stepped out of the courthouse. Their microphones jabbed at me like beaks, voices layered over each other. "Mrs. Whitman, how does it feel to be free? Did you ever consider divorce? What will you do with the house now?" The winter air stung my cheeks, but I stood straighter than I had in years. I didn't answer them, just walked to the cab waiting by the curb, the one my lawyer had arranged. The driver, a sturdy woman with salt and pepper braids, gave me a single nod as I slid into the back seat. "Where to?" she asked. "Home," I said. The word tasted unfamiliar. The roads leading back to the house were slick with half-melted snow. I watched the trees blur past, the same ones I'd counted from the basement window during the rare moments David left the curtain open. 5 pines, 2 oaks, a birch stripped bare by winter. When the cab pulled into the driveway, I half expected to see David's truck parked crooked by the garage, the way he always left it. But the space was empty. Just that damn basketball hoop he'd installed for a son we never had. The backboard cracked where he'd thrown a wrench at it during one of his rages. I paid the driver, added a generous tip. She hesitated before pulling away, glancing at the house. "You need help carrying anything in?" "No," I said. "Everything I need is already here." The front door key still turned smoothly in the lock, one advantage of marrying a contractor. He kept hinges oiled and locks polished, even as he let the rest of the house rot. The air inside was stale, tinged with burned coffee and that cologne David doused himself in. 3 bottles a month, always charged as a business expense. I'd written that down too. I dropped my purse on the kitchen counter. His boots still sat by the door, caked in dried mud. A half-empty whiskey glass perched on the coffee table, the ice long melted. The house was frozen exactly as he'd left it on that Tuesday morning. The basement door was ajar. I didn't go down there. Not yet. Instead, I climbed the stairs, one hand on the railing, testing each step as if the wood might give way beneath me. The master bedroom door was closed. I pressed my palm against it, exhaled, then turned the knob. Our bed was unmade. David's shirt spilled out of the dresser drawer he never bothered to close, and on his nightstand, the one I wasn't allowed to touch, sat his wedding band. He'd stopped wearing it after the first year, but he kept it there like a trophy. I picked it up. Gold, surprisingly light. The inscription inside read always in jagged script. I pocketed it. Jenny called as I was pulling fresh sheets from the linen closet. I didn't recognize the number at first, but then her voice, higher than I remembered, tighter, crackled through the phone. "Mom!" The sound of it knocked the air from my lungs. I sagged against the hallway wall, the phone pressed too hard to my ear. "Hey, baby," I said. Silence stretched between us. Then, softly, "Can I come over?" She arrived at dusk, her car coasting up the driveway like she was afraid to make noise. I waited on the porch, arms crossed against the cold. She'd cut her hair, choppy, uneven, the way she used to hack at it with safety scissors as a kid when she was nervous. We stared at each other. "You look good," I said. Her laugh was rough. "You look tired." I shrugged. Basements aren't known for their spa treatments. The joke landed badly, her face crumpled. "Mom, Jesus." She took a step forward, then stopped, fists clenched. "Why didn't you tell me? All those times I called, all those visits he canceled." "You were in New York," I said, "starting your life. And you were in hell." The words burst out of her raw. "I should have known, should have seen." I reached for her then, pulled her tight against me. She smelled like rosewater and laundry detergent, like my little girl again. Her shoulders shook. "None of that," I murmured into her hair. "You got out. That's all I ever wanted." We ordered Chinese food that night, spreading cartons across the dining table like a patchwork quilt. Jenny chattered between bites about her job at the ad agency, about her cat that still didn't like strangers, about nothing and everything all at once. The way people do when they are afraid of silence. Afterward, she stood abruptly. "I'm staying the night." "Jenny." No arguments. She grabbed her duffel bag from the hall like she'd planned this all along. "Guest room still got sheets." I hesitated. "He used it as an office." She froze, then quietly, "Right." We hauled his desk out together, shoved it into the hallway with a satisfying scrape of wood on hardwood. Jenny unearthed an old box of bedding from the hall closet, floral print, pilly from years of washing. She shook it out with more force than necessary. "I should sue the bastard's estate for back rent," she muttered. I snorted. Later, lying in my own bed for the first time in 6 years, I stared at the ceiling. The mattress was too soft after so long on a basement cot. Down the hall, Jenny's phone buzzed once, twice, then quiet. I waited for the old panic to rise, the dread that used to claw at my throat whenever David received a call. But all I felt was stillness. The house creaked, settling. Somewhere, a clock ticked, and for the first time in years, I slept. Morning light spilled through the bedroom curtains, the kind of soft yellow that used to wake me gently on weekend mornings. I lay there blinking. It took a full minute to recognize the sensation of sunlight on my face. The alarm clock beside me flashed 12 o'clock in angry red numbers. David had unplugged it years ago, called it unnecessary. I reached out and pressed the button. Silence. Down the hall, I heard the shower running, the pipes groaning like they always did when Jenny turned the water too hot. I inhaled slowly. The air smelled faintly of burnt toast and the lavender detergent I dug out of the laundry room last night. Ordinary things, human things. Jenny emerged 20 minutes later, hair wrapped in a towel, wearing one of her old high school t-shirts. She froze when she saw me at the kitchen table. "You're up," she said, as if I'd performed a magic trick. "I slept through the night," I told her. It came out hoarse. She nodded slowly, then strode to the coffee maker and jabbed at the buttons with more force than necessary. "You don't even look surprised." I ran a finger along the edge of the table where David had once slammed a drawer shut and splintered the wood. That's the funny thing about surviving. Even when you plan for it, you don't really believe it'll happen. Jenny's hands stilled on the coffee pot. "Did you?" she whispered. "Plan for it." The air between us thickened. I could still see her at 7 years old, standing in the doorway with her backpack too heavy on her shoulders. "Mom, when's Dad coming home?" That same hesitation in her voice now. The coffee maker gurgled. I waited until it finished before answering. "Not the way you think." She brought 2 mugs to the table and slid one toward me. It was chipped, the one I used to drink from every morning before work. "Tell me," she said, and so I did, in pieces, between sips of coffee gone cold. How after the first year in the basement, I'd started keeping notes in the margins of library books, tiny pencil marks only I would recognize. How I'd memorized David's clients' phone numbers when he left his planner open, cataloged the amounts of his under-the-table cash jobs. How every time he brought down groceries, I'd pocket a single item, a can of soup, a handful of rice, and hide them in the insulation behind a loose basement panel. Jenny's knuckles whitened around her mug. "You were starving." "Not starving," I corrected softly. "Preparing." A car door slammed outside. We both jumped, an old reflex. Jenny laughed shakily. "Guess we're both still." Waiting for the other shoe to drop, I finished. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her fingers were warm. "It's over, Mom." I squeezed back. "I know." We spent the afternoon cleaning. Jenny hauled boxes of David's clothes to the curb while I sorted through the filing cabinet in what had been his office. The folders were meticulously labeled: tax returns, property deeds, life insurance. My fingers hovered over one marked E.W., medical. Inside, years of forged doctor's notes citing early onset dementia, prescription slips for medications I'd never taken. At the bottom, a single sheet with the letterhead of a private psychiatric hospital. The date was 2 weeks from now. "Find anything?" Jenny called from the hallway. I slipped the folder into my purse. "Nothing important." That night, we ordered pizza and ate it on the living room floor, surrounded by half-empty boxes. The TV played some old romantic comedy, the volume low. Jenny talked between bites about the senior designer who stole her ideas at work, about the Brooklyn apartment she could barely afford, normal gripes, a normal life. "You should come visit," she said abruptly. "See the city, get out of this house for a while." The thought sent a jolt through me. Leaving, just packing a bag and going, I stared at the pizza crust in my hands, grease soaking through the napkin. "Maybe," I said. Jenny's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then sighed. "Work crisis." "Go handle it," I told her. She hesitated. "You'll be okay." I looked around the half-lit living room at the dust motes swirling in the lamplight. "Yeah," I said. "I think I will." After she left, I sat in the silence for a long time, tracing the edge of the coffee table with my finger. The house still smelled faintly of pepperoni and laundry detergent. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder. Beneath the hospital paperwork, tucked into the very back, was a checkbook. David's handwriting sprawled across the register, dates, amounts, initials, but one entry in particular caught my eye. "EW final expense $5,000, dated the morning he died." I leaned back against the couch, the checkbook limp in my hands. Outside, a car rolled slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping across the curtains. I waited for fear, for panic, for anything. But just like last night, all I felt was stillness. A few minutes later, I got up and locked the front door. Then I took the checkbook to the kitchen, struck a match, and watched it burn in the sink. The flames were blue at the edges. Pretty almost. The phone rang as the last embers died. I answered on the 4th ring, already knowing who it would be. "Mrs. Whitman." The voice was polite, professional. "This is Detective Ruiz. We have a few follow-up questions about your husband's financial records." I turned on the tap and rinsed the ashes down the drain. "Of course," I said. "I'd be happy to help." The water ran clear. The house was quiet. And for the first time in a very long while, I realized I was telling the truth. My name is Eleanor Whitman, and if you're enjoying this story, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The days after Detective Ruiz's call passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I answered every question they threw at me, my voice steady, my hands folded neatly on the kitchen table whenever they visited. The detective had soft, brown eyes that never quite met mine, like he was afraid of what he might see if he looked too closely. The third time he came by, he brought a younger officer with him. She had her hair pulled back tight enough to stretch the skin around her temples, and she watched me like I might suddenly bolt for the door. They sat on opposite ends of the couch while I took the armchair David had always claimed as his own. The indent from his body was still there, the leather worn smooth in the shape of him. "Bank records show several large withdrawals over the past 6 months," Detective Ruiz said, flipping through his notebook. "Can you tell us what those were for?" I folded my hands in my lap, the way I'd practiced in front of the bathroom mirror. "David handled all our finances. I'm afraid I wouldn't know." The younger officer leaned forward. $50,000 in cash withdrawals, Mrs. Whitman. You expect us to believe you had no idea." Silence settled over the room like dust. I studied the whorls in the hardwood floor, counting the seconds until Detective Ruiz cleared his throat. "Officer Chen is new to domestic cases," he said, shooting her a look. Then to me, "What my colleague means is, these transactions stand out given the circumstances of your husband's passing." I met his gaze then, really met it for the first time. "Are you asking if I had something to do with that money going missing?" Officer Chen opened her mouth, but Ruiz spoke first. "We're trying to understand the full picture. That's all." Outside, a garbage truck groaned down the street, its brakes squealing like a wounded animal. I waited for the noise to pass before speaking. David had a lot of business expenses. Cash jobs, things like that. He never liked to discuss the details with me. I let my voice waver just enough. He said it would only confuse me. The detective's pen hovered over his notepad. When the silence stretched too long, I added, "There was a fishing cabin up near Sisters. Maybe he was putting money into that." Ruiz wrote something down as Officer Chen's eyes narrowed. "You didn't think to mention this before." I pressed my lips together, feeling the tremor start in my hands. "I don't know if it's important. David bought it years ago before we were married. I've never even seen the place." Detective Ruiz closed his notebook with a soft snap. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitman. We may need to follow up once we've checked out this fishing cabin." I walked them to the door. Officer Chen lingered on the porch, her gaze sweeping over the peeling paint on the railing, the mismatched rocking chairs David had picked up at some yard sale. "You mind if we take a quick look around the property before we go?" Before I could answer, Ruiz shook his head. "We'll call first next time, Mrs. Whitman. Have a good afternoon." The screen door creaked shut behind them, and through the mesh I watched Officer Chen say something low and sharp to her partner. Ruiz tipped his head back as if counting to 10, then opened the passenger door of their unmarked car. The engine turned over twice before catching. When they were gone, I leaned my forehead against the doorframe. The wood was cool against my skin, grounding me. I thought about the cabin, a real place, though David had sold it years ago to pay off some gambling debt. Let them chase that lead for a while. The phone rang while I was scrubbing the kitchen sink. I let it go twice before picking up. "Mother," Jenny's voice crackled through the line. "You're still planning to come next weekend, right?" Water dripped from my elbows as I turned off the faucet. "I don't know, sweetheart, with everything going on. The lawyer said it would be months before probate settled. You can't just sit in that house the whole time." Papers rustled on her end. "I already booked your train ticket, non-refundable." A laugh bubbled up from somewhere unexpected. "Since when did you become so pushy?" "Since birth, according to you." She hesitated. "Seriously, though, come to New York, see something that isn't the inside of that God-forsaken house for a change." I squeezed my eyes shut against the prickling behind them. "All right," I whispered. "All right, I'll come." That night, I dreamed of the basement. The damp concrete under my bare feet, the single bulb swinging overhead, casting shadows that stretched and yawned like living things. David stood at the top of the stairs, his features blurred in the darkness. "You'll die down there," he said, not unkindly. "Just like you deserve." I woke with a gasp, the sheets twisted around my legs. The digital clock on the bedside table read 3:18 in angry red numbers. The closet light clicked on with a soft hum. My hands didn't shake as I pulled down the suitcase from the top shelf, the one I'd used for book club weekends before David made me quit. A fine layer of dust puffed into the air when I unzipped it. By dawn, I'd packed 3 outfits, my toothbrush, and the manila folder from David's office. The checkbook was gone, of course, but the hospital admission forms remained. I ran my finger over the embossed logo Hawthorne Behavioral Health, the place where I was supposed to disappear. The doorbell rang just as I was zipping the suitcase closed. Through the peephole, a UPS man shifted from foot to foot on the porch, holding a padded envelope. I waited until his truck pulled away before opening it. Inside, a key taped to a scrap of paper. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Storm Cellar, New Mexico. My fingers closed around the key. The metal bit into my palm. Out the kitchen window, morning light slanted across the lawn, gilding the grass where David used to park his truck. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I slipped the key into my pocket beside the train ticket, feeling its weight bump against my thigh with every step. The tea kettle whistled on the stove as I poured hot water over the chamomile tea bag. Steam rose in delicate curls. The doorbell rang again. This time, it was Reverend Michaels from First Baptist holding a casserole dish. "Thought you could use some comfort food," he said, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Tammy's famous tuna noodle." I took the still warm dish, breathing in the scent of cream of mushroom soup and crushed potato chips. "That's very thoughtful." He hesitated, one hand on the doorframe. "I've been meaning to ask. The church basement storage room. David had us set aside some boxes for you down there. I thought you might want to go through them." Blood roared in my ears. "What kind of boxes?" "Medical supplies, mostly, some files." He shifted his weight, suddenly uncomfortable. He said it was for when your condition worsened. The casserole dish trembled in my hands. I forced myself to take a breath, then another. "I'll come by tomorrow. Thank you, Reverend." When he left, I set the dish on the counter and walked straight to the bathroom, where I bent over the sink and splashed cold water on my face. My reflection in the mirror stared back, hollow-eyed and older than I remembered. The phone rang for the 3rd time that morning. I almost didn't answer, but then I saw the 212 area code flashing on the caller ID. "Mrs. Whitman." A woman's voice, crisp and professional. "This is Margaret Weiss from the New York Times. I was hoping to speak with you about the journals that were entered into evidence." I hung up mid-sentence, my fingers oddly steady. The key in my pocket seemed to grow heavier. Outside, clouds gathered on the horizon, turning the sky the color of tin. The suitcase waited by the front door. The train left in 6 hours. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, the house creaked, settling into its bones. The train platform was nearly empty when I arrived, just a handful of travelers hugging coats tighter against the cutting wind. I kept my head down, pretending to study my ticket as the conductor scanned the platform. 10:35 on the dot, right on schedule. The key in my pocket pressed against my leg like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I didn't look back at the town as the train pulled away. Not at the church steeple piercing the slate-gray sky. Not at the bakery where I used to buy cherry pie every Sunday before David decided sugar was bad for my nerves. The Oregon countryside blurred past the window, fields giving way to patches of pine forest, so thick the light turned green between the trees. A woman across the aisle smiled at me, her knitting needles clicking softly. "First time taking the Southwest Chief." "No," I lied. "Just been a while." I turned back to the window before she could ask more. The newspaper Margaret Weiss had sent still lay folded in my bag, the headlines screaming up at me every time I shifted. "Oregon Widow's Diaries Reveal Years of Control." The article quoted passages I didn't remember writing. Descriptions of David loosening the stair rail. David canceling my doctor's appointments. David standing over me while I slept, counting my breaths. The dining car smelled of burnt coffee and stale pastries. I slid into a booth by the window and ordered tea, watching the landscape flatten into scrubland. The waitress, name tag reading Lorna, leaned in as she set down my cup. "You're her, aren't you? The basement lady." My fingers tightened around the porcelain. Steam curled between us. Lorna glanced left, then right. "My sister was married to a man like yours." She pressed a napkin into my hand, her nails bitten to the quick. "Took her 15 years to get out. She was gone before I could respond." On the napkin, smudged in lipstick, Albuquerque safe house ask for Carmen. The clatter of wheels against tracks became a steady rhythm. I unfolded the newspaper again, tracing the photograph of David's toolbox, the one the police found in my basement. Pliers with what looked like blood on the handles. Rope cut to precise lengths. A notebook labeled medication schedule in my handwriting, but the dates didn't match the prescriptions. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass. The train whistle blew, long and mournful. Sleep came in jagged pieces. Dreams of darkness and the smell of damp concrete. David's voice echoing down the basement steps. "You'll learn to appreciate what I do for you." The scrape of a chair being dragged across the floor above me. Metal clicking against metal, his key turning in the lock. I woke gasping as the train shuddered to a stop. Flagstaff, Arizona. Outside, the station lights buzzed against the pre-dawn dark. The knitting woman gathered her things, her son waiting on the platform in a baseball cap. They hugged like they hadn't seen each other in years. The manila folder crinkled when I shifted. Inside, the Hawthorne admission forms listed a date 3 days from now. A doctor's scrawl. Patient exhibits paranoid ideation, anosognosia, requires institutionalization. David's signature looped confidently at the bottom. A conductor's voice crackled overhead. "Next stop, Albuquerque." The safe house napkin stuck to my damp palm. The key dug into my thigh. The suitcase held everything I owned, yet it barely weighed anything at all. I pulled out the photograph tucked behind the hospital forms, the last picture taken of me before the basement. Standing in front of this house I designed, hydrangeas blooming by the porch. My daughter's arms slung around my shoulders, both of us squinting into the sun. Before David convinced her I was sick, before she stopped returning my calls. The train lurched forward. I tore the hospital forms into narrow strips, then tore those in half, watching the pieces swirl in the draft from the vent. The woman across the aisle caught my eye. Didn't smile this time. Just gave a small nod, like she understood secrets weren't the only things buried in basements. New Mexico rose up outside the window, red cliffs, a lone hawk circling. The key felt slick between my fingers. When I closed my eyes, I saw storm cellars and desert dust, Reverend Michael's uneasy expression when he mentioned those boxes. There would be questions waiting in Albuquerque, more reporters, more headlines. But for these few quiet hours, with the world rushing past outside, I let myself breathe. The tea had gone cold. I drank it anyway. Next segment, the train whistle blew again as we pulled into Albuquerque, a lonely sound that sent shivers down my spine. The safe house napkin was damp in my fist now, the lipstick letters smeared from how many times I'd run my fingers over them. Albuquerque safe house, ask for Carmen. The name felt like a prayer. I grabbed my suitcase, the handle cold against my palm, and stepped onto the platform. The desert air hit me sharp and dry, the morning sun already warm against my face. The station was busier than I expected, people rushing, voices raised over rolling luggage, a child crying somewhere behind me. For a moment, I just stood there, blinking in the light, so used to dimness that the brightness stung. It had been years since I'd been outside without David's supervision. Years of the basement, of bolted doors and silence. My fingers twitched, half expecting his grip on my elbow, but I was alone. I took a deep breath and followed the signs toward the taxi stand. The weight of the key in my pocket kept me steady, proof that I still had something of my own. A taxi driver glanced up as I approached, his face etched with deep lines. "Where to?" I hesitated, then unfolded the napkin again. 1532 Mesa Drive. He nodded and popped the trunk. His eyes flickered over my suitcase, so small and light, but he didn't ask. He just loaded it without a word. The drive was quiet. Albuquerque rolled past the windows, buildings painted in desert shades of terracotta and cream, the mountains hazy in the distance. I pressed my forehead to the glass, heart hammering against my ribs. I used to love car rides. Before, I would roll the window down, let the wind whip my hair, laugh when David complained about the noise. Now, the weight of freedom sat heavy in my chest, terrifying and sweet at the same time. The taxi slowed in front of a low, unassuming house. Stucco walls, a patch of drought-resistant grass out front, the curtains drawn but not tightly. The driver turned in his seat. "This the place?" I swallowed. "Yes." He gave me a long look. Then, instead of telling me the fare, he said, "You need help with that bag." Something inside me cracked open, just a little. "No," I whispered. "Thank you." I paid in cash, money I'd scraped together from hidden grocery stashes, from selling my wedding ring at a pawnshop 2 towns back. The bills felt too light in my hands. David had controlled everything, the accounts, the credit cards, even the grocery receipts. But he'd forgotten about the loose bricks in the basement wall, the hollow space behind them where I'd tucked away $50 bills over the years, pressing them flat between the pages of old cookbooks. The taxi pulled away, kicking up dust. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the front door. Safe house. The word wrapped around me like an armor. Before I could knock, the door opened. A woman stood there, broad-shouldered, her dark hair streaked with silver. She took one look at me and said, "Eleanor Whitman." Not a question, a statement. I nodded. She stepped aside. "I'm Carmen, come in." The inside of the house was warm, lived in, a scent of coffee and sage in the air. No dark corners, no locked doors. I clenched my hands together to keep them from shaking. Carmen guided me to the kitchen where a mug of tea sat steaming on the table. "Sit," she said. "Breathe." I did. The tea was chamomile, sweetened with honey. I hadn't had honey in years. David didn't like sweets. Carmen watched me, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "Lorna called ahead," she said. "Told me what she gave you." Lorna, the woman on the train, the one who'd slid the napkin into my hand like a lifeline. I reached into my pocket, clutching the key again. "You don't have to talk yet," Carmen said. "But when you're ready, we'll listen." For the first time in 6 years, I let myself cry. The tears came slow at first, then hard, shaking my shoulders, spilling hot down my cheeks. I cried for the house I designed, for the daughter who thought I was too sick to remember her, for the years of silence, for the way David's voice still curled around the back of my thoughts, whispering that I'd never make it without him. Carmen didn't touch me, didn't tell me to stop. She just waited until I was done, then slid a tissue across the table. I wiped my face, took a shuddering breath. "What happens now?" She leaned back in her chair. "That depends on you." And just like that, the world felt wide open, terrifying, possible. Somewhere outside, a bird trilled, bright, fearless, like it had never known a cage. I took another sip of tea, the honey thick on my tongue, and whispered, "Good." The days at Safe House passed in increments so small I barely noticed them at first. Sunrise through the sheer curtains of my temporary bedroom. The way Carmen hummed off-key while she made breakfast. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery down the street, something I hadn't tasted since before the basement. One morning, I woke to find a stack of clothes folded neatly on the chair by my bed. Jeans, a soft green sweater, simple things, things that wouldn't draw attention. Carmen poked her head in as I ran my fingers over the fabric. "Figured you could use something of your own," she said. "Hope the size is close." I pulled on the sweater while she waited outside. The wool was slightly scratchy against my skin, a grounding sensation. When I opened the door, Carmen held out a pair of shoes, sturdy sneakers with thick soles. "Walking tour today," she announced. I froze outside, unchaperoned, my pulse hammered in my throat. Carmen must have seen the panic flicker across my face. She pressed the shoes into my hands. "Just around the block, one step at a time." The air outside hit me like a physical weight, cold and crisp, impossibly vast. I clutched Carmen's arm without thinking. She didn't shake me off. We walked slow, past neighbors' houses with their trimmed hedges and crooked mailboxes. A man on a bicycle waved. I flinched. "Normal people wave back," Carmen murmured. I lifted my hand, stiff as wood. The man had already pedaled away. At the end of the street, Carmen paused in front of a tiny blue house with rosemary spilling over the walkway. "Janice," she called. The door creaked open. A woman with hair like spun cotton leaned against the frame. "Took you long enough," she said, grinning. Then her eyes flicked to me. "So this is the famous Eleanor." Carmen nudged me forward. "Janice handles documents." Janice ushered us inside without further explanation. Her living room was cluttered with stacks of manila folders, a typewriter gathering dust on the side table. She motioned for me to sit, then plopped into an armchair across from me and folded her hands. "Right, let's get you unfrozen." I blinked. "Identification," Janice clarified. "Bank accounts, all the things that man stole." She reached for a notepad, clicking her pen. "First question, did you ever sign anything?" The memory rose without warning, David's hands guiding mine over paper, his breath warm on my neck. "Sign right here, Ellie, just a formality." "Yes," I whispered. Janice exchanged a glance with Carmen. "Copies?" "I tried," I said. "He burned them." The pen tapped against the notepad. "Witnesses?" A choked laugh escaped me. He wasn't stupid. Janice leaned back, surveying me. "Honey, you'd be surprised what counts as a witness." She tore off a sheet of paper, scribbled something, and handed it to Carmen. "Start with the church ladies." Carmen pocketed the note. "Told you." Janice ignored her, turning to me instead. "Here's the good news, Eleanor. People remember." Her voice softened. "Your daughter remembers." The room tilted. I gripped the arms of the chair. "Don't look at me like that," Janice said, not unkindly. Of course I called her. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. My daughter, my Claire, was a ghost I'd locked away to survive. The thought of her voice, her face, was like pressing on a bruise. Janice pushed a box of tissues toward me. She cried too. Later, back at Safe House, Carmen handed me an old corded phone, the receiver heavy as a brick. "Your call," was all she said before stepping into the kitchen. The numbers blurred as I dialed. 1, 2, then, "Mom." The sound of her voice unraveled me completely. I pressed the receiver to my ear, nodding though she couldn't see me. "I remember," I choked out. "I remember everything." On the other end, Claire sobbed, great, heaving gulps of air. "I thought he'd erased you." A gust of wind rattled the window pane. Somewhere beyond it, a child laughed, the ordinary noise of a world I'd almost forgotten. "I'm still here," I said, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a lie.